There, students. Tom Richey here, and broadcasting with my friends at the Bill of Rights Institute. And we weren't supposed to be broadcasting originally this week. This is technically my spring break, but between the quarantine and then the College Board really just dropped a bomb on us. Yes, some of y'all are a little bit confused about there being a session today. But what happened was when the College Board suddenly announced that, hey, the exam is going to be a 5 document DBQ. And so what happened here is this was just a very sudden kind of thing that the Bill of Rights Institute asked me, hey, given that we've gotten this new information all of a sudden, then why don't we go ahead and just make sure that we are prepared for this. Okay, so we're going to be going over something we'd originally planned, but then we thought, well, it's not likely to be a DBQ, and then it's going to be a DBQ. So we've got several things that we want to go over in terms of updating you about what's happening here. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and take a look at, let's see, the APUSH DBQ. So I'm going to go ahead and put a rubric out here in front of you. So we're going to put that into the chat. I've got this on my website. You can go to tomrichey.net, but we're also going to share this with you so that you don't have to necessarily go anywhere else in order to look at it. So the Bill of Rights Institute is going to put this onto the chat. Let me adjust my lighting real quick. I think I'm just a little bit bright. I will be right back. Just going to turn down my light just a little bit so I'm not shining at you quite so much. And with that, I wanted y'all to see I got this shirt, Don't Cough on Me, you see, with the Revolutionary War snake and all of that kind of stuff. So which is, of course, on theme today because the DBQ that I'm going to share with y'all is going to be about the American Revolution. Now, one thing that we want to note is that the boundaries for the DBQ this year, okay, so they are a little bit different, and the test is a little bit different. Now, what they've said is that units 1 and 2 will not be directly assessed on the DBQ. But what we want to understand is that units 1 and 2, Colonial America, they could be useful depending on, on what we run into here. Okay, so for example, if the DBQ is on unit 3, there could be a lot of stuff that would be good, some very good stuff there. So for example, usually if it's an American Revolution DBQ, for example, it's going to be something to think about like the Navigation Acts and salutary neglect. So understanding the 13 colonies, I think, is going to be important here. And then also thinking in terms of, Native American cultures. When we think about the first topic in the course, that if there is a DBQ dealing in any way with, Andrew Jackson, the late 19th century, manifest destiny, that could still be useful. So when you think about this, there's some stuff from units 1 and 2 that could be good context. Now, when you think about like Spanish, French, and Dutch colonization, maybe not. Okay, so as far as that goes, think about this. Don't forget about units 1 and 2, but we want to make sure that we don't put too much emphasis there either. Now, the DBQ can come from anywhere between 1754 and 1945. Okay, so 1754 to 1945 will be the boundaries. Now, let me tell you also what we want to think about is that the 20th century, now it's rare that I make predictions, but I think that the 20th century is probably going to be problematic. First of all, we very recently had some DBQs on imperialism in the progressive era. But then when you take into account that a substantial amount of AP classes did not get past World War I before they left, before everybody was sent home, then there could be some serious equity complaints if the DBQ were about, let's say, the Great Depression or World War II. And then to use Cold War terminology, is the College Board really going to go into a game of brinkmanship, like going right up to 1945? I don't know. I feel like a lot of people would cry foul if that happened. So if we think about this, we're probably looking at 1754 to 1900, like as our most likely, like when people are asking me, about this. So yeah, at most, we've got 1945, 191 years, but you can also shave off 45 years from that. I mean, we really could be looking at about 150 years of US history that is going to be the most likely place for the DBQ. Now, are we going to not prepare for the 20th century? Of course, we're going to prepare for the 20th century, but I do want you to know where I'm thinking about the DBQ is most likely to end up. That I do think that 20th century, yeah. Now, a lot of people are saying that it's been a long time since we've had Andrew Jackson on the the Jacksonian antebellum era. So, that could be fair game. Now, as far as that, a Roaring Twenties DBQ would be fun, but at the same time, I think also that when you take into account the number of classrooms that didn't get that far, I think that that's going to be problematic if people see that. But we don't want to forget about that content. So with that, let's go ahead and go over the rubric. Okay, so what we're going to do is first off, we're going to go over the rubric and make sure that everybody understands what's going on with that. Okay, so yeah, I think that James, your class that got to the 1920s, I think there are a lot of classes like that. There are a fair amount of classes that never got to the Depression, never got to World War II. And a lot of people are going to say, either that's not fair, or there may be some people who are like, I'm going to unplug my modem now. And there you go, technical difficulties. Let's try again in June. But with that, if we prepare for everything, we don't have to worry about unplugging modems or anything like that. So with that, let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And while I'm sharing my screen, I want to note you are currently watching the Bill of Rights Institute, and they've got a lot of cool stuff on their YouTube channel. We are streaming right now from the Bill of Rights Institute's YouTube channel, and there's a series that's actually pretty new, Bright and Early. You get it, BRI, Bill of Rights Institute. It's clever. All right, that's clever, Bill of Rights Institute. And Bright and Early. Okay, so this releases on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They just started this last week. If any teachers are watching, this could be a good thing for assignments for students, because what they're doing is they're taking some things from U.S. history, and they are, I believe, U.S. history, if not primarily, but maybe going on a limb there, but they are, I'm presuming. And so with U.S. history, and they're making comparisons, like making things relevant. So for example, going into things like the 1917 pandemic. So make sure to subscribe to the Bill of Rights Institute's YouTube channel, because they do a lot more than just streaming reviews. So make sure to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And with that, let's go ahead and start talking about the rubric. Okay, so this has been shared. So as far as what is going to be the difference in this year's DBQ, so when we look here, this is a rubric for the 2020 exam only. Now, it is a 10-point rubric instead of a 7-point rubric. We don't need to panic because none of the basics are being changed, okay? No, there are no fundamental changes. No basic elements of the DBQ are being removed. Nothing is being added. It's just a matter of the number of documents required, okay? So as far as that goes, just the number of documents required. Now, your introductory paragraph, contextualization, and thesis. Now, these are unchanged. You still get 1 point for contextualization, 1 point for thesis. Now, that's 1 point in 10 versus 1 point in 7. Now, as we go into strategy on Thursday, what I'm going to go into is contextualization as a standalone point and kind of in some ways a bonus, the way this rubric is set up. I would think in terms of, since you're most likely going to be typing, that you want to write your thesis at the beginning. You want to get into your body paragraphs. And then once you're done, time allows, go back and do contextualization. That would be my advice. Okay. Now, of course, listen to your teacher's advice as well. But when I'm thinking about this, I'm kind of guessing that 6 out of 10 points on this rubric is certain to yield a passing score. I don't see where anybody gets 6 of these 10 points and doesn't pass the exam. I mean, it would be very unlikely that didn't yield a passing score. And 7 and up is, I think, likely to yield a 4, and then you could get in a 5 territory when you get to 8 and 9. I don't see a scenario where somebody would have to get all 10 points in order to get a 5. So that's one thing when I start thinking about, like, complex understandings, now only 1 of 10 points. So you want to consider that. So contextualization and thesis are right there at the front. Now we get into the documents, evidence, and analysis. Now, accurately describes the content of at least 2 documents. This is what I used to call or I still call the I love lamp point. It's just a lot of you young folks hadn't seen Anchorman. So with that, accurately describes the content of at least 2 documents to address the topic of the prompt. Now, this has gone down from 3 to 2. There are 5 documents total instead of 7. And now you can get a point for accurately describing 2 of them. Basically explaining the reason I call it the I love lamp point is you looked at the lamp, you said that you loved it. Like, Brick, do you really love the lamp, or are you just looking at it and saying that you loved it? You're showing that you really understood the document. You're not quoting, okay? You're not using quotes. You are, showing in your own words. Basically, you can paraphrase 2 documents and get a point. Now, your next 2 points are in the support of an argument. Now, note here that we see here that supports an argument in response to the prompt using at least 2 or 4 documents. Now, what they've done here is, instead of, like, how it's generally 6 out of 7, instead of them saying 4 out of 5, now you can get a point for using 2 documents. And what I'm going to show you are some strategies, and we're thinking about this. There is a solid path to 8 points only using 3 out of the 5 documents. A lot of you are going to be thinking about, how do I make sure I don't run out of time? Okay, when we think about, with 45 minutes being all the time that you have, how do we make sure that we don't run out of time? That could be an issue. And so there's a strategy that I've come up with where, you could get 8 points by just using 3 documents. So when we go through documents, we're going to be thinking about that. Okay, so with that, I'm going now into the point of view, what we call point of view, or HIP or HIPPO or HAPPY, whatever kind of analysis for these documents. Instead of it just being 1 point for getting 3, we see here for 1 or 2 documents explains how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to the argument. Now, that is, 1 point for 1, 2 points for 2. So that's 2 points. If you know how to analyze these documents, that's up to 2 points for you. Now, they have also given you an opportunity to use 2. I feel like the count, y'all watch Sesame Street with the count, 2 pieces of outside evidence. Ha 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 ha. All right, so now you've got 2 pieces of outside evidence that you can use. You get 1 point each. So, and then complex understanding is the same as it ever has been, but now note, first of all, it's only 1 point out of 10 now instead of 1 point out of 7. Do the math. And second of all, you only have 45 minutes. Do the math. Okay, so when I saw this rubric, when I started thinking about complex understanding, don't do it, Anakin. I have the high ground, and so the thing is that, you think about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then you underestimate my power. So I tell you, I saw a really funny, like, little video meme where it showed him saying, I have the high ground. It's over Anakin. And Anakin, it goes back to another part of the, of Anakin from earlier. And he's like, yes, master. I understand, master. and that's it. It's like end of movie. So with that, complex understanding. Now, certainly some of you may back into that point, but I think that intentionally designing your essay with this point in mind is going to make this overly complicated. Okay, so what I want to do in this, in this webinar today is I want to take a look at the document here. Okay, so when we take a look at, I've made a DBQ for the 2020 exam with these guidelines, and it is about the American Revolution. And I believe that I have made this available to the Bill of Rights Institute. Let me just make sure that everybody's got that. So this is a direct link to this file if you want this file. Now tell your friends we're live. Okay, we've got some people here. Okay, so the Bill of Rights Institute can share that. I can't share any links since we're not on my channel. So as far as that stuff, we've got some great stuff here. Y'all are doing some predictions, but let's make sure that we are going to, that we're noting, the mechanics here. Okay, so with that, if the Bill of Rights Institute will put that link that starts with app.box.com for the PDF, then that is the link to the actual file that I'm sharing on my screen. Okay, and so another thing I want to make sure that I've got. Okay, so good. Now, this is something that we still are working on because of the suddenness of this announcement. We've got some works in progress, and one thing that I want to show off, and this is going to be sent out pretty soon. Make sure that there are 3 accounts that I think are really important for you to be following on Instagram, that you should be following. First of all, BRI Students. Okay, so when we think BRI Students, that is the Bill of Rights Students account. Okay, so make sure you're following that. I'm following them, so you should too. Now, also Marco Learning, and of course my own Instagram at Tom Richey. So at BRI Students, at Marco Learning, at Tom Richey. We are putting some finishing touches on an annotation chart, because what you're likely going to be doing, what we expect, is you're going to be looking at these documents on a screen. So we are looking at these documents here, and this is a guide that we're going to release once we put the finishing touches on it to kind of help you get your essay all prepared. Okay, so when we think about this, thinking about this being efficient, and first of all, we want to think about this when we look at strategy. Okay, when we look at strategy for this, that a 6-point strategy that I will unfold here is dealing with, okay, have a thesis statement, accurately describes 2 documents and supports the argument. Now, note that I'm recommending 3 documents, because that way you can mess up on one, you still get the point. Okay, so here are 3 points here. Then I would say your POV plus HIP, whatever you want to call it, for 1 document, and then 2 pieces of outside evidence. Now, if you want to make this an 8-point strategy, which is, I would say, certain to yield a 4, I would add contextualization, and I would add your POV plus for a second document. Okay, so with that, there's a path to 8. Now, notice here, you can use 3 of the 5 documents and get a solid 8 points. So I would, unless I were just, my ego's that big and my skills can match my ego, I would not try to get these remaining 2 points. But this is my 6-point strategy in bold. And then this is my 8-point strategy. When you go back, you're like, okay, let me do another POV, and then let me do contextualization. And that's going to get you a 4, possibly a 5. I mean, an 8 could be a 5, but I would say more, that if we want to be certain, probably 9 points for a 5. But when it comes down to it, that with 45 minutes, done is going to be better than perfect. Okay, because it's not like a normal year where you have an hour, but then you can go a little bit beyond that. You're like, I'll just take it off my LEQ. I don't like those stupid LEQ topics anyway. You can't do that this time. Okay, it's going to be a little different now. So go into it with the understanding that you can basically just you can decide that what you want to do is just, hey, I can strike 2 of these documents. Look at this like a jury selection. Okay, so when you think about this, a jury selection, if you've ever seen this on like a show or a movie or something like that, when you see the lawyers who are lawyers who are engaged in a jury selection, they're deciding which ones they want to use. So you'll notice that on this guide that I've got here, that I'm, that we will be sending out very soon. Okay, we're going to be sending out very soon. That Marco Learning is making this with my input. That one thing you've got here if the document is confusing you at all, if you don't know exactly how you'd use that to support an argument, strike it, okay? You'll just strike it, and you have up to 2 strikes that you can use and be fine. And then you go to document 2. Am I going to use that, or I'm going to strike it? And then briefly summarize the document. Now, brief, okay, that means like you're not trying to write your essay here. Your point is not to have to keep looking back at the document. So just a 1-sentence summary. This is basically what's going on here. And then for 2 documents, your POV plus or HIP analysis, this may be the first thing you do. You may do that before anything else. And then what argument could this document be used to support? Okay, so that's something that's another thing that you want to note here. What is a general argument that we can support? And then once you've gone through all the documents, you've decided, okay, I'm going to use these 3, and then this is what's in the document, so I can't use that for outside evidence. What's left over? Then you're going to figure out 1 to 2 pieces of outside evidence, and then you think about contextualization in your essay. Now, note here that I say if time allows, what may be some good ideas for contextualization, because, you know, I would definitely counsel you to do that when you see time remains on the essay. Okay, so that would be very important here. And so now, how many points for supports, argument, and complexity? Now, up to 2 points, and again, the rubric is linked, up to 2 points for supporting an argument with documents. 1 point for complex understanding. And again, I feel like the complex understanding point in this setting, that if you're doing it, you're really doing it for ego more than anything else. And I just wouldn't recommend pursuing that point intentionally. Some of you are going to insist on it, and that's fine, okay? But that's you know, just generally not my recommendation. I mean, you saw what happened to Anakin Skywalker, right? And so as far as that goes, oh, I need to pull up something real quick and get into, yeah. So I've got a draft of this setup sheet here. All right. So y'all are going to see me working with something that's in Google Docs. So I'm going to be going through here, kind of leading you through how we would go through this DBQ on the American Revolution. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we want to think in terms of, this is going to have to do with causation. So if we go into this here, evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the rising tensions between the American colonists and the British government in the period 1754 to 1776. And so we see here document 1. So now one thing we want to do when we're thinking about our argument, we want to start thinking about what were the different causes. Okay, when we think about the causes for the American Revolution, we want to be thinking about those causes. Like when we look at these documents, how do these fit into the overall framework of causes? So let's see. I mean, if we're thinking about this, we should know before we go into the exam, you know, that this is taxation and then control of the economy. So we think about taxation and control of trade, or we could put both of those into kind of an economics kind of thing, right? Controlling the economy, taxation, control of trade. We could think about the presence of British troops in the colonies and violent incidents regarding British troops, involving British troops. And also we go into taking away representative government from the colonies. Okay, so those are, you know, typically going to be the major causes of the American Revolution. So with that, we go into this here. Okay, so from the North Carolina Gazette, November 20th, 1765. So on Saturday, the 19th of last month, about 7 o'clock in the evening, near 500 people gathered together in this town and exhibited the effigy. Now, what we want to note here, we may know what an effigy is, but they're making sure that you understand. Whenever you see this, make sure to look at the explanatory note. A roughly made model of a particular person made in order to be damaged or destroyed as a protest or expression of anger, basically like a human piñata, of a certain honorable gentleman, and after letting it hang by the neck for some time near the courthouse, they made a large bonfire with a number of tar barrels and committed it to the flames. The reason assigned for the people's dislike of that gentleman was for from being informed of his having several times expressed himself much in favor of the stamp duty. Now, here's the thing. Whenever we're looking at documents, especially when we've just got 45 minutes, we could keep reading if we wanted to, but why keep reading when we already can kind of see what's happening? Okay, so I already understand what the document says, and also we should know a good bit about the Stamp Act. So when I put these annotation sheets out there, what we're going to do here is we definitely want to use this document. Oops, okay. We want to use this document. And what I'm going to do here is now what I would do on this one is I would put the Stamp Act. Okay, so the Stamp Act, direct tax by Parliament. Okay, so direct tax by Parliament. And then if we're briefly summarizing, I would say here, I would say that, protesters in North Carolina, burned a man in effigy for supporting the Stamp Act, okay? And I could also talk about, they also boycotted British goods. Also I could mention something about the repeal. So this would add some historical context for this document. Now, what argument would this be used to support? Unfair taxation, okay? Unfair taxation or, economic meddling, right? So, when we think about that unfair taxation or economic meddling, but basically, the unfair taxation being the biggest one here. Now, as far as that goes, then we could go into document 2. Now, document 2, some of you may be able to understand this when you're looking at it. Okay, so 1767, let's see. So whereas it is expedient that a revenue, yada, yada, yada. Okay, I see here glass, I see lead, I see paint, tea, paper. Oh, this looks like, anybody got it? Anybody got it? Wait for it. The Townshend Acts, okay? So we could go into, we could say, okay, that's the Townshend Acts, and that's another tax. Now, some of you may look at this and you're like, what? And you may decide to skip it, okay? So that's certainly a possibility. You might decide to skip it and go on to another one. So some people, certainly the Stamp Act should be familiar to everybody. For some people, they may not quite get the Townshend Act. So there are some people that might say, you know what, I'm going to strike this one and I'm going to go on to the next one. Now, in this case, I would probably be likely to use this, and then I would put here, control of trade. And then of course we've got the bigger argument of economic meddling. Then, as we look here, that this is something that basically the Townshend Acts. Okay, so the Townshend Acts passed, impose tax to put import taxes on paper, paint, lead, etc. Okay, so we don't want to do too much here. Now, again, we could have struck this document. Okay, so this is something that we want to think about as well. Now, when we go to document 3, so let's go on and go to document 3. Now, strictly speaking, like when we look at the rubric, if you understand 2 documents very well, technically you can just go ahead and start writing your essay, go in the outside information. Now, you want to make sure you understand what else is in there. So I would definitely, we want to look, at least take a glance at the content of every document. Now, I recommend having 3 documents that you're working with, having at least 3. So with this, we go to document 3, and I think we're still very likely to have a visual source here. Okay, so still very likely to have a visual source. And what we see here is something that should look familiar to y'all, an engraving by Paul Revere, March of 1770. Now, when we look at this document, we see that British soldiers who are all lined up, that they are, they're all lined up and they're firing on a crowd and they look defenseless, okay? So we could say something about this, that, we look at it and we see that they're firing on a defenseless crowd, okay? So British soldiers in a line, firing on a defenseless crowd. Okay, now your POV plus, you can say that this is the, going into historical context again. I like historical context. That's one of my favorites to use when we're trying for document analysis, because all you've got to do, it's not outside evidence because you're not bringing in something from completely outside of the documents, but you're painting the bigger picture here. Okay, so you're showing what's behind it. So what we're seeing here is, I know that this is the Boston Massacre, and then we're going to note here Paul Revere, part of the Sons of Liberty. Okay, so made the British look worse than they were. Okay, so the thing is, and I want to economize my words, I may not have to write all of that there. Now, what argument could this be used to support? Okay, so basically British troops in the colonies. Okay, so British troops in the colonies. And so when we're looking at that, now with these three documents, we want to know what the other two say because we want to know what's there for outside evidence, but we've got enough here to go ahead and get started if we wanted to, if we were going for the 6 to 8 point 3 document model. Okay, so let's go ahead and pause here. Let me see if we've got some things here. Now, okay, so here we go. James is asking, would you say that, taxation was more of a cause of the revolution or democracy beginnings in America? Now, here's the thing, James, that's for you to decide. All right, so what we want to understand, if we get a prompt like this, where it's saying evaluate the relative importance of different causes, what it's saying here is, I can't answer this question for you. It's just like when people ask me, like, Mr. Richey, do you think the Civil War was about slavery or about states' rights? And I always tell people, like, first of all, don't forget the economic argument. And second of all, you need to evaluate the evidence and you need to assign a hierarchy of causes. Like, for complex understanding, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to assign a hierarchy of causes. And that's up to you. So here's the thing, you could put in your outside evidence, or possibly, if you're going this route, James, I would say for your contextualization, doing like the First Great Awakening or the Enlightenment and going into some of these beginnings of democracy in America. So that's something that you can certainly get into with that, because there's an argument to be made that the First Great Awakening led to more like democratic sentiment and more involvement of the crowd in a desire for governance. So with that, let's go ahead. Now, we've technically got enough to start, but we also want to analyze these other documents and see if something might jump out at us. Now, the most important thing, I'm going through here demonstrating, but when you're actually doing this DBQ, what you want to do here when you're actually doing this DBQ is you want to make sure that you don't spend a lot of time analyzing documents that you don't plan to use. Okay, so remember, 45 minutes is going to go by quickly, because I think even though the College Board recommends 60 minutes on the DBQ, let me check in the chat here. I'm kind of curious here. I often tell students that, like, look, most of the time, students will go a little bit over. Y'all go ahead and tell me, do you believe that you get your DBQ with 7 documents and a typical DBQ done in 60 minutes? Or do you tend to go 65 or 70? Or do you tend to have it finished early? What is something that is common for you? And while we do that, I'm going to, so as far as that goes, and you're right, James, when you look at that, you look at the, the moral tariff for the Civil War, which is something that, we typically don't really get into a whole lot in a course, but, in a survey course, but very important. Okay, so if you use the navigation acts, now, Eric, the navigation acts for this, typically I would use this, the navigation acts would be great historical context, especially if you're thinking about, so for historical context, you typically want to use something like from either the very beginning or from the previous period. So the navigation acts, I would say, more historical context than the more historical context than outside evidence. So as far as that goes, what we want to understand, oh, some of y'all finish, finish quickly. But yeah, I find that a lot of times students are used to going over. This is going to be a hard stop at 45 minutes. So I want to make sure from a strategic perspective, make sure you understand what all of these things are about, like so that you know where you can bring in outside information and contextualization, but make sure that you're not wasting a lot of time analyzing documents you don't plan to use. So going from there, okay, so I see General Thomas Gage, orders to Lieutenant Colonel Smith, April 18th, 1775. Okay, so having received intelligence, the quantity of ammunition, yada, 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 had been collected at Concord. Okay, so we should be, okay, I see something about Concord and a rebellion against His Majesty. Let's see here. Okay, so I see Concord again, 1775. That you will seize and destroy all artillery, ammunition, provisions, tents, small arms, and all military stores, whatever. But you will take care that the soldiers do not plunder the inhabitants or hurt private property. Now, what you see here, once again, after going through here, that when you look here, wow, they're even being told to destroy like food, stored food. So with that, after the first paragraph, you should kind of know what's going on, right? That this is going to be, this is something that is also going to go into British troops in the colonies. Okay, so when we think about, when we think about British troops in the colonies, that's going to be another thing here. And also, this could also support an argument about the suspension of representative government. Okay, so that's something here that when we look here, that British general. Okay, so tells orders. Let me. All right, that should help. Okay, so orders orders supplies at Concord, destroyed to prevent rebellion. Okay, now most of you, now again, you only have to do this for 2 documents. Okay, but what I'm going to do here is Lexington and Concord, that this is basically, it will lead to the first battle of the Revolutionary War. Okay, and so then what document or what argument? So British troops, okay, or suspension of representative government. Okay, could be one of those. Okay, so when we think about what argument could this be used to support, there you go. Now, then document 5 is going to be from the Declaration of Independence, and this one's a free-for-all, okay, because when you look at document 5, it's going to have, basically, you could use this for any argument that you want to get into. Okay, so as far as that goes, by this point, I'm pretty well satisfied that I have enough documents without using this one. But at the same time, it's a very familiar document. So when we look here, quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, that could be used for quartering British troops, for cutting off our trade, for imposing taxes among our consent. Okay, and then we see here that he has dissolved the representative houses. Okay, so what we see here, for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. So when we look at the Declaration of Independence, okay, so we see here that this is, of course, the Declaration of Independence. Does it really need any introduction? Okay, so grievances against King George III. Now, somebody could, note if they wanted to use, some analysis here, Jefferson, the primary author. Okay, now we could note here that this was over a year, after the war began. Somebody might even be able, now common sense might be a better thing to use as outside evidence, but you could also, note the influence of common sense. There are some things that, it's kind of a fine line whether you want to use that for your, for your contextualization, or if you want to use that for a, for outside evidence. Now, what could this be used to support? Troops in colonies, unfair taxation, control of trade, and suspension of representative government. Now, for something like this, y'all understand that knowing the causes, what's really going to be important for your studying is knowing the causes of the American Revolution and being able to arrange these documents so that they support an argument addressing some of those causes. Again, for 90% of students, I'm recommending a 3-document setup where you should strike some of these documents and you should use the 3 documents that you find to be best because you want to leave room for outside evidence. Now, if we're going to contextualize our essay, navigation acts, mercantilism, salutary neglect. Now, that is if we're focusing on economic arguments, okay? So if focusing on economic arguments, okay? Now, let's think about this. And I want to have a little chat with y'all. And there's a little bit of a delay here, so I'm going to have to wait just a second. And I may have a question that I can answer in the meantime. I want y'all to think about what are some pieces of outside evidence that we could bring in here. Okay, so I want y'all to think about this. And again, my friends at Marco Learning are going to be putting this out very soon. So look for that to drop later this week. Make sure you're following us on, social media and all of that stuff. Okay, so that's going to be out there for you. Now, let's go ahead and take a look here. If the test is online, we'll be able to use keyboard shortcuts. Oh, now that is fascinating, James. Now we're going to have to see what is going to, like the College Board says that we are going to be in a situation where we can actually do this in a. So what this is going to do here is the College Board is going to let us kind of simulate this thing, and so that's something that's going to be important as we as we go through this. So I think that we're going to have to wait for the simulation, but we are going, it is going to be something that's going to be interesting to see here. Okay, so make sure that we're that we're thinking about that. And yeah, I think that is a that's a great question. If that is something that we can do, that's really going to be pretty incredible, and it's going to be a game changer because then you can see, is this in the documents? Is that in the documents? And you can do some pretty quick finds. I don't know though what's going to happen there. Okay, so we'll stay in touch about that. But wow, James, you asked some pretty amazing questions. So with that, let's go over to the chat and see what are y'all saying here for what are some pieces of outside evidence, some things that we haven't seen yet. Some things that we didn't see in the documents. I want y'all to, go ahead and tell me, okay? So are there some things that we haven't seen in the documents that we might be able to work here for outside evidence? And I don't know how quite far we are on the lag, but we should have at this point. We should have at this point a few answers. Now I may have to just kind of go through here and do this myself. So it doesn't look like anybody's going to offer anything, which is fine. Okay, that's what y'all are watching for me for. Okay, yeah. Now the Sons of Liberty, we could do that as outside evidence. In the way that I set this up, I was doing the Sons of Liberty as context for document 3, but let's say you chose not to use document 3, or you just use the Sons of Liberty in another context. That could work. Okay, now in my case, I would be doing the Sons of Liberty as context, but it's certainly something that if used a certain way, we could get into that. So Emily, good job there, just as long as you're not also using that as document context. And certainly, we could contextualize document 3 without ever invoking the Sons of Liberty. We wouldn't necessarily have to mention the Sons of Liberty at all. So that would be something that could work here, okay? And yeah, so something like this, the committees of correspondence, the First Continental Congress, okay, that's something that we could definitely see there. let's see. And as far as that goes, now John Adams, Brian, and his defense of the troops in the Boston Massacre, I might say here that that would be something that would probably be better for contextualizing document 3, but it certainly could work. Okay, so what we could note here, we could do, we could go into like the Continental Congress. Okay, so the Continental Congress, first or second. Okay, now another thing, let's think about there's some obvious stuff here. When I mention it, y'all are going to be like, oh my goodness, why did I not think of that? Okay, let's think about, now enlightenment as an inspiration might be more contextualization, but it could also be used as as outside evidence. But I want y'all to think about something very obvious, okay? Because there are always going to be gaps, and I've left you a wide gap. Okay, what would you say was the most controversial piece of legislation that was passed by Parliament? So controversial that the colonists had a nickname for it. The actual name of the act wasn't that great either, but the colonists gave it a nickname. So go ahead. What I want y'all to think about is, in some cases, think about you don't have to dig so deep as the committees of correspondence, which James may be able to tell you about, but not a lot of people probably can. But we want to think about if we can go with the obvious first. So what are we thinking here? If we're thinking in terms of what would be the most offensive piece of legislation passed by Parliament. Yes, okay, we have a winner. Segev, you said that the intolerable acts, okay? So the intolerable acts, yes, Caitlin, very good for y'all, okay? So when we think about this, now contextualization is something that is in the background, and it provides some background information. So for example, if we're looking at, well, overall, a lot of this was inspired by the Enlightenment. So that's something. Now, the Stamp Act was very offensive, but it's in the documents. But what I would say here is, when you look at the Intolerable Act, so we think about this, the Boston Tea Party. Okay, so the Boston Tea Party, or intolerable acts. Okay, so when you're looking at this now, if you were going to do the first or second Continental Congress, you would need to note here why that Continental Congress convened. So that's why I tell people, don't go into, don't try to go into something that you don't know a lot about, because the intolerable acts, we could rattle those off. Okay, so we could rattle off the intolerable acts, like the Boston Port Act. They closed the Boston Harbor, if you don't remember Boston Port Act. That Massachusetts was going to be ruled by a military governor, Thomas Gage. That you had a new quartering act. Now, either of the quartering acts could be brought in. So the intolerable acts, the Boston Tea Party, the first or second Continental Congress, the Sugar Act, if we're going to focus on economics, the Sugar Act would be a great piece of something, okay? Great piece of outside evidence. Now, as far as that goes, we could be, like the Enlightenment, okay? So the Enlightenment, or the British political history, okay? So such as the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights, if focusing on on politics, okay? So on, basically representation or government. So if focusing on tyranny. So the thing is, when we look at the Enlightenment, this is something that I typically refer to contextualization as like a lurker. Okay, so when you think about this, like we're thinking about outside evidence is like right here. Okay, it's right here, outside evidence. Okay, the intolerable acts, it's specific, it happened, it's in the timeline. So when you think about this, if it's an event that you would put in the timeline, that's likely going to be something that is outside evidence, if it's an event that you can just put in the timeline. Now, if it is something that you really can't put as an event on the timeline, but it's a lurker, okay? So if I look outside my door and there's some dude just standing about 50 yards away that was there like an hour ago and is still there. And I'm like, what's this guy doing out there? Okay, is it about time to call the police or something like that? The Proclamation of 1763, if it can be fit into an argument, could be something else, depending on what you're arguing here. So with that, and actually the 7-document version of this DBQ, I had something from Chief Pontiac. That was one of the things that I took out. So that was something that was in the original 7-point version of this DBQ. So, contextualization is like a lurker. And so if I were wondering about that lurker, I'm like, okay, why is that lurker out there? And it's something that gives me more like, I can get behind. Woo! All right. Any blessings would be appreciated. Bruh, the audacity of those redcoats. I tell you what, bruh, the audacity of those redcoats. If somebody could put that into their DBQ this year, I think that would be really funny. Bruh, the audacity of the redcoats. That's a really good one. I think I need to remember that for review season. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, James, for that. Now, so as far as that, yeah, if the lurker's a redcoat, we definitely need to not call the police, call like the Continental Army, right? So as far as that, thank y'all so much for your blessings. And just 1 second, please, ladies and gentlemen, just excuse me for just a moment. And I tell you, I'm going to use the fancy little feature here, and I'm going to mute myself for just a second. Okay, all better, all better. So as far as that goes, now strategically, I'm going to say that your contextualization, again, you should probably do that last. Okay, so again, as far as your strategy, now next time on Thursday at 6:30, I'm going to be back. Okay, Thursday at 6:30, I will be back, and we are going to work on setting up the DBQ. Okay, so in this one, we're focusing on going over the documents, and in Thursday's broadcast, I'm going to be focusing more on setting up the DBQ and all of that great stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and get some general questions here. Okay, so we've got a few things. Yes, guy, I dabbed. The World Health Organization actually is recommending dabbing for people who are sneezing. Not that I necessarily care about the World Health Organization, but if anybody tells me to dab, if Joseph Stalin asked me to dab, I'd probably dab, not because Stalin asked me to, it's just because I wanted to dab. So with that, if y'all got any questions, any general questions on going through the documents, managing time, getting ready for that. And again, we're going to be back on Thursday at 6:30 in order to look at how are we going to set up the argument. And I'm going to have some more stuff to share with you. So I'm going to hang around for just a little bit. We got about 5 minutes left in the broadcast, and see if we've got any general questions, any clarifications, anything that you want to ask me. And again, we are lagged just a little bit as far as when I put these questions out there and when people are able to answer them. So let's just sit patiently for just a little bit, take a little sip out of my mug. And see, I realize, I'm using a Henry VIII mug here. This, I need to get a Washington crossing the Delaware mug. That's what I need. Okay. Do I know where you will be typing the test? Okay, so where you will be typing the test, wherever you choose. Okay, so you have a number of options. You can either type the test on your computer at home or at somewhere else, or you have the option as well. You have the option to do it on your phone or to write. Now, one piece of advice I'm giving everybody: if I were you, I'd be spending 20 minutes a day on a typing app, or not an app, but I'd be on my computer typing. There are websites where you can practice typing. Just Google typing test, typing practice. Most of y'all, your experience with typing is like you've got a paper that's due tomorrow, right? And you type a paragraph, you piddle around with it, then you check your social media and your text, then you piddle around with it again. Most of y'all have never been in a situation where you're actually typing a response on a timed test. Okay, most of you've never experienced that. I would be focusing on spending about 20 minutes a day improving your words per minute, improving your accuracy, and just making sure, and also your endurance. I did a typing test with a tutoring client for like 3 minutes last night, and I realized, I can type like 80 words a minute. I type super fast, but after 3 minutes, my hands were tired. Okay. So when you think about this, that, your hands, like you think about when you've written a DBQ, how tired your hands are. Imagine when you're typing for 20 minutes as fast as you can. And that's going to be, there's going to be a big difference on the 30 words a minute person versus the 60 words a minute person. I think if you type every day for about 20 minutes, or like a certain amount of days a week, maybe 4 or 5 days a week, give your hands a little rest, that your hands are actually going to get more, you're going to get more endurance. And, and even if you want to start at 5 or 10 minutes a day, but I'm talking about like typing for speed and accuracy. Okay. Make sure you're doing that. Now, will this be available for rebroadcast? Yes, this will be publicly available on the Bill of Rights Institute YouTube channel. All right. And can you put outside information as a separate paragraph? Ashley, I'm not going to recommend that, because outside information should support an argument. And that's what I'm going to be looking at next time, is how are we going to set this up? How are we going to actually set up a DBQ so that we can use evidence argumentatively? You want to think about in terms of using outside evidence the same way you would use a document. Caitlin, we are going to be in touch with some study guides and stuff like that, and making sure that you have, like, the biggest thing for this open book, open note, so to speak, is that you decide what your notes are going to be that you carry in there, that they be simple, that they be concise, that they be limited. Do not Google, and do not have your whole APUSH notebook sitting there that you're going to rifle through. You really don't have a lot of time. Now, what I've been doing with my friends at Marco Learning is we're going to be working on getting some unit guides out to you. For example, we talk about the causes of the American Revolution, taxation without representation, control of trade, British troops in the colonies, suspension of representative government, and thinking for a couple examples of each of those. So if you've got notes that are strategically designed to be used with the exam, then yes. Google, no. Okay. Your notebook, no. It needs to be stuff that you have done it on purpose. Okay. Now, Emily, I am not, I don't think you're going to be able to print the documents. And that's why we're creating this, I showed you this thing that I'm creating with my friends at Marco that we're almost finished with. We're just not quite ready to release it. But this document annotation sheet, okay, that we want to make sure that you have something where you can make a summary of the documents. And the goal here is, once you annotate, that you don't have to look back at the original documents. That's going to be the goal here, that we're going to be trying to do with that. So that's what I'm recommending. I don't see you being able to print the documents, but you can use an annotation sheet. All right. So with that, Brian, thank you so much. Yeah, my quote unquote spring break. I've been basically just nonstop almost doing sample essays, broadcast, explaining things. So yeah, what a spring break this has been, right? And so going from that, I will be doing more crowdcast streams, more YouTube streams. I've just been really focused on creating sample items, making sure everybody's up to speed on this test. But yes, I will be, doing some more crowdcast and YouTube stuff. And of course, for the next, few Tuesdays and Thursdays, pretty much through the end of April, I believe, we're going to be broadcasting with the Bill of Rights Institute. So yeah, the annotation chart that I'm going to give you, Maxine, you will be able to print that out and write on that as you're screen reading the documents. Okay, so again, Thursday is going to be more about getting it together, getting your DBQ together. And by that time, I'm going to have divorce, beheaded, died, divorce, beheaded, survived, James. But with that, wow, that's an interesting way to look at it. So with that, yeah, I'm going to have all of these sheets finished by Thursday. We've all been scrambling, but we're going to work on how to set it up, how to write it, how to make this as simple as possible. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not already subscribed to the Bill of Rights Institute's YouTube channel, let's get in there and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and make sure that you've got access to the bright and early webinar videos that are going to come out, that are going to, be great for studying, because they're going to get into, into making history relevant. And when you can make history relevant, that's when it really becomes exciting and memorable. Okay, so I would definitely subscribe to the Bill of Rights Institute. Turn on your notifications so you know when bright and early videos come out, and you also know when I'm broadcasting. Some of y'all were caught by surprise with this. So make sure that you are subscribed to the Bill of Rights Institute's YouTube channel. Remember, follow at BRI Students on Instagram, and also my account at Tom Richey, and then my friends at Marco Learning, who will also be doing some great stuff. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure, and I'll see y'all on Thursday.